Ever missed the perfect shot because your Nikon Z just would not focus in the dark? You're lining up this gorgeous scene, you hit the shutter, and the photo looks like it was taken by a stormtrooper who missed again. Today we fixed that. In this video, I'm walking you through the ultimate Nikon Z low light settings guide. Autofocus, Starlight View, ISO, shutter speed, VR, tripod work, every setting you actually need in the exact menus so your camera stops hunting and starts nailing shots in the dark. By the end, you'll have a repeatable low light setup you can use for portraits, events, cityscapes, and even some astro. No new lens, no new body, just smarter settings. Hi, Joe here from Shutter Speak Photography. It is very nice to see your smiling face again here on YouTube. I've photographed the National Hockey League, major New York City concerts, pop culture events, weddings, families, real estate, and more. My work's been published in newspapers, magazines, and even on a concert t-shirt. If you want your Nikon Z to feel like a trusted tool instead of a mystery box, hit subscribe and let's get your settings working for you, not against you. All right, let's dive in. We'll start with autofocus, then I'll show you Starlight View and night modes, and we'll talk ISO and noise, and finally I'll give you a full step-by-step low light setting walkthrough with a before and after at the end. Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare, and I want to say a quick thank you to them for supporting the channel. I really love shooting cityscapes, and I've been leveling up with a Skillshare class called Cityscape Photography, Shooting with Symmetry and Perspective by Jamal. He shows you how to compose stronger shots, use natural light, and capture interesting characters against beautiful architecture while keeping it fun no matter what level you're at. Whether you're a complete beginner, a working photographer, or an Instagram enthusiast, Jamal's process will inspire you to take your cityscapes to the next level. Skillshare has tons of photography and creative classes taught by working pros, so you can keep growing your skills whenever it fits into your schedule. And with the holidays coming up, a Skillshare membership makes a really thoughtful gift. Also, they offer gift cards, so the creatives in your life can choose the classes that inspire them most. The first 500 people to use my link in the description or scan the QR code will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can jump in and start exploring classes right away. Get started today. When light levels drop, contrast drops, and that's when your camera starts to struggle. The autofocus system needs contrast to lock on. In low light, it's basically staring into the void going, what exactly am I supposed to focus on? So, we're going to give it a little help. First, try to use a small AF area near the center of the frame whenever you can. On Nikon Z bodies, you have focus points all over the sensor. But in really dark scenes, the center area tends to be the most reliable. Avoid the extreme corners when you're really pushing the camera in the dark. Second, give the camera something with contrast. Instead of trying to focus on a flat, dark jacket, move the AF point to the edge where the jacket meets a brighter background. Or use the edge of a face or a highlight on hair or the edge of a sign. Any hard edge between light and dark will help the focus system lock much faster. The AF system locks much faster when it can see a hard edge between light and dark. That's true on all Nikon Z bodies. Third, turn on the low light helpers Nikon actually gave you. Go into your custom settings menu, into the autofocus section. That's the A tab. Look for low light AF and turn that on. On many bodies, it's option A10 or A11. On some, it's slightly different, but It'll be in that autofocus section. Low light AF lets the camera focus in darker conditions by slowing down a bit and using a more sensitive detection. Nikon's own docs say this improves accuracy in low light when you're in AFS at the cost of slightly slower focus. Next, the AF Assist Illuminator, that little light on the front of the camera. In the same autofocus settings, you can choose whether that AF Assist light comes on in AFS when things get really dark. It only reaches a few feet, so it's really for close subjects, but it can be the difference between no focus at all and bam, locked. Now, the big choice everybody asks about, AFC versus AFS in low light. In very low light, AFS is usually your friend. AFS lets the camera take a moment, confirm focus, and then it stops. It doesn't keep hunting once it's happy. AFC is trying to track motion continuously. In the dark, that often turns into the lens racking in and out, and it feels like the camera's lost. So for still subjects, portraits, posed groups, static scenes, switch to AFS and a small single point area. For moving subjects, or if you're panning with people on a street, AFC can still work, but expect more hunting and be ready to fire multiple frames. Now, this part is huge. When the lights get really low, turn off face and eye detection and fancy auto subject tracking modes. These modes are fantastic in good light. They can track eyes and faces like magic. But in the dark, they're trying to find faces and shapes in a noisy mess. That's when you see the AF box bouncing all over the place and the lens racking back and forth. So when the lights go down, go old school, AFS, single point or a small area. Put that point exactly where you want focus and you'll see the camera behave way more predictably. If you want a best of both worlds setup, consider back button focus. Leave the camera in AFC, assign AF on to the back button, and remove the autofocus from the shutter button. Now, when you hold the back button, the camera behaves like AFC and tracks. When you release it, focus stays where it is. So like AFS, you don't have to switch modes. You can just change how long you hold your thumb down. All right, that gets your autofocus under control. Let's talk about the magic darkroom cheat code, Starlight View. On certain Nikon Z cameras, there's a feature called Starlight View for photo live view. You'll find this on cameras like the Z8, the Z9, the ZF, the Z6 III, and newer bodies like the Z5 II and the Z52. If you have one of those, here's how to turn it on. First, activate Photo Live View. Then, go into the Custom Settings menu, go to Shooting and Display section, usually in the D tab, look for Starlight View Photo Live, and set it to on. On some cameras it's D11, on others it might be D10 or D9, but it will say Starlight View in that menu. When you turn that on, your EVF or LCD gets dramatically brighter. Suddenly, you can see and compose in scenes that look completely black before. It's like night vision for your camera. And on cameras like the Z9 and Z8, enabling Starlight View also extends the low light autofocus range dramatically, down to around 8.5 or even -9 EV in some tests, which is wild for night and astro shooting. Now, the big warning label, Starlight View only affects the display. It does not change your actual exposure. It doesn't secretly change your ISO or your shutter speed. Think of it as the camera saying, here, let me brighten this up so your human eyes can see. But the sensor is still working with whatever exposure settings you've chosen. Because of that, what you see in the EVF is no longer what you see is what you get. The preview is now artificially brightened. The camera knows this which is why it often disables the histogram overlay when Starlight View is turned on. So here's the trap. Your EVF looks nicely bright. You think, oh, that's perfect, looks great. You take the shot. Later, when you look at it on your computer, you realize it's 2 stops underexposed and way noisier than you expected. So you use Starlight View like a flashlight, not a meter. Turn it on when you literally can't see the scene well, enough to compose or focus. Use it to frame the shot, get your focus, then turn it off again. Go back to normal live view so your preview, your histogram, and your exposure all line up with reality. Also, be aware that when Starlight View is active, the live view can get a bit jerky or laggy. That's normal. The camera is doing some extra processing just so you can see something. Think of it as night vision goggles, not sports mode. And if you're on an older body like the original Z6, Z7, Z6 II, or Z7 II, and you don't see Starlight View in your menu, you're not missing it. Those bodies simply don't have this feature. You'll lean more on low light AF, the AF assist light, and good focus technique instead. Now, let's talk ISO, because this is where a lot of low light image quality is either made or destroyed. ISO is just how much the camera is amplifying the signal it gets from the sensor. More ISO means the camera is turning up the volume, which makes the image brighter, but also amplifies noise. Here's where it gets interesting. On Nikon Z cameras, some of the newer bodies use what's called dual gain sensor. That means there are essentially 2 amplification circuits on the chip. One optimized for low ISO and another optimized for higher ISO. You can think of it like having 2 sweet spots. It's important to note that all the Z6 series bodies and the ZF use dual gain technology, while the original Z5 does not, and that the Z8 and Z9 also have dual gain sensors with specific crossover points. Independent testing of the Z6 II shows a dual gain crossover around ISO 800. Below that, base ISO gives you the best dynamic range. Above that, the second gain kicks in around ISO 800 and behaves unusually well compared to 400 to 640. For the Z6 III, tests and discussions put that second gain at ISO 800 as well. For the Z8 and Z9, the dual gain setup is around ISO 500. So here's a practical way to use this without needing a white lab coat. On many of these cameras, you have ultra clean, low base ISO, like 64 or 100, and then a second good zone up to around ISO 500 or 800, where the camera changes how it amplifies the signal. In practice, that means if you have to raise ISO, jumping to 800 or 500, depending on your model, can actually look better than creeping around at 400 or 640 and then trying to lift shadows later. But, and this is important, Nikon doesn't plaster dual base ISO 64/500 all over the marketing materials, and it doesn't behave identically on every camera. A Z5 II isn't the same as a Z6 III, and a Z8 isn't the same as a Z52. So I can't tell you all Z cameras have base 2 at ISO 800. Some do, some don't. And the crossover also depends on log profiles and video, which is a whole other rabbit hole. So here's the safe, practical way to think about ISO for stills. Number 1, in good light, you still want to live near your true base 64 or 100, depending on the body, for maximum dynamic range. Number 2, when light drops and you're handheld, don't be afraid of ISO 800. On cameras like the Z6, Z6 II, Z6 III, 800 is genuinely a solid working ISO. On the Z8, Z9, 500 or 800 are both very usable. Many photographers happily shoot at ISO 3200 or 6400 on these cameras, especially when they're shooting RAW and using decent noise reduction in post. Number 3, Use auto ISO smartly. Instead of letting it run wild, a typical setup for low light might be base ISO 64 or 100, a maximum ISO of 6400 or 12800, and then set a minimum shutter speed tied to your focal length. That way, the camera protects your shutter first, then raises ISO as needed, but it never goes into ridiculous territory unless you explicitly allow it. And in-camera noise reduction? For JPEG shooters, standard NR is fine. For RAW shooters, switch it off and deal with noise in post. Most modern noise reduction software will outperform the camera smoothing, and the camera will happily smear fine detail if you let it. All right, now let's bring this all together into a full settings walkthrough. Autofocus, Starlight, ISO, shutter speed, VR, so you got a complete recipe. First, shutter speed. There's a classic rule of thumb. Your shutter speed should be at least 1 over your focal length to avoid blur from camera shake. So at 50mm, try and stay at 1/50th of a second or faster. At 200mm, 1/200th of a second or faster. With modern high-resolution sensors, a lot of people actually double that rule and aim for 1 over twice the focal length, especially if they're pixel peeping. So at 200mm, you might prefer 1/400th just to be safe. Now, here's where things get fun. If your camera has in-body stabilization and your lens has VR, you can sometimes shoot much slower than that and still get a sharp shot. Think 1/20th or 1/10th or maybe even 1/5 if you're wide and very steady. Image stabilization can buy you 2 to 4 extra stops of handholdability. Just remember, stabilization only fixes your hand shake. It does not stop your subject from moving. If your subject is dancing, no amount of VR is going to freeze them at a 1/4 second. With VR or IBIS on, you can shoot slower. It's like having inertial dampers in your camera, stabilizing the ship when things get shaky. But even the Enterprise can't save you if your subject decides to go to warp speed. If you're using a tripod, whole different game. Now, the camera isn't moving, so you can let the shutter run as long as you want. 1 second, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, even minutes with a remote release. That's where night cityscapes, car trails, and astrophotography live. Tripod engaged? You're basically a Jedi Master at this point. Long exposures, no shake. The force is with your shutter. Just don't forget to check one thing. Stabilization. This is one area where Nikon has been a bit ambiguous with the Z mount. For some of the newer cameras like the Z8, Nikon actually says that normal or sport VR are also recommended if the camera is mounted on a tripod or monopod. But in the very next breath, it adds that off may be a better choice with some tripods depending on conditions. Tom Hogan, who tests this stuff more than is probably healthy, notes that Nikon's general VR advice leans towards you don't have to turn it off even on a tripod, but he still finds cases where VR on a lockdown support can hurt rather than help. So here's the reasonable middle ground. If you're on a rock solid tripod, head locked, shooting a long exposure where you absolutely care about pixel level sharpness, think landscapes, night cityscapes, astro, it's safer to turn VR IBIS off and let the stable support do the work. If you're on a light tripod in the wind, on a moving floor, or with a loose head where the camera can actually wobble, leaving VR on and normal can sometimes help. Nikon's old wording basically says normal sport are fine on a tripod, but off may be better with some tripods, which is a polite way of saying test it on your setup. So my advice, for critical lockdown shots, try both. Take one frame with VR on, take one with VR off, zoom in, see which one looks better. Once you know how your particular camera and lens and tripod behave, you're set. Now, let's wrap the settings walkthrough into a few practical profiles. For handheld people in low light, say events or street at night, you might use aperture priority. Set your aperture wide open or close to it, f1.8, f2, or f2.8. Turn on auto ISO with a max of 6400 or 12800 depending on your tolerance. Set your minimum shutter speed to around 1 over your focal length or double that if you're on a high-res body. Turn VR on, use AFC for movement but in very low light. Switch to AFS single point with low light AF and AF assist enabled. Turn off face and eye detection if it's hunting and just put that single point where you want the eye sharp. For handheld static scenes at night, like cityscapes, where you can't use a tripod, similar idea, but you can often afford a slower shutter because, well, buildings don't move. Use AFS, single point, VR on, and maybe allow the minimum shutter to drop to 1/15 or 1/8 if you're wide and steady. ISO will climb, but you'll get a sharp file. For tripod work, night city, light trails, astro, switch to manual. Pick your aperture, maybe f4 or f8 for cityscapes, a wider aperture for astro. Set ISO low, 64 or 100 to maximize quality, and dial in whatever shutter speed gets you a good histogram. Turn off VR, IBIS as a starting point. Use a remote or self-timer, and if you have Starlight View, use it to briefly compose and focus, and then turn it off before you shoot the final frame. Which setting surprised you the most? Was it Starlight View not affecting exposure, the ISO sweet spots, or how much better single point AF works than subject tracking in the dark? Let me know in the comments and tell me which Nikon Z body you're using so I can tailor future videos to the cameras you actually own. If you found this helpful, give the video a like, subscribe for more Nikon Z guides, and check out my Nikon Z Facebook group. The link is down below, where we share real-world settings, sample images, and help each other squeeze the most out of these cameras. Thanks for watching. I appreciate every one of you. I'm Joe from Shutterspeed Photography, and I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, go make some awesome night photos, and may your autofocus be ever in your favor.